You know, sometimes the most exhausting relationships we find ourselves in aren't the loudest ones. They're actually the quiet ones. The ones where every single sentence is just carefully measured, where every emotion is edited down, and where every casual conversation feels like it could suddenly, unpredictably, go wrong. The silent damage of walking on eggshells in relationships.
And if you've been there, you know that after a while, you actually stop asking yourself, why are we fighting? Instead, the question turns inward. You start asking, why do I feel so nervous just being myself? There's this profound kind of emotional exhaustion that people rarely talk about. It doesn't come from screaming matches. It doesn't even always come from betrayal. Sometimes it just comes from spending months or even years trying desperately to avoid upsetting the person you love. You find yourself rehearsing simple everyday conversations in your head before you even bring them up. You catch yourself monitoring their mood the absolute second they walk into the room.
You start saying things like, oh, maybe it's not a good time, or never mind, it's okay. And it's not because it's actually okay, it's because you already know exactly how the conversation is going to end. And eventually, through all of this, your nervous system learns something deeply dangerous. Being emotionally honest just no longer feels safe.
Section 1. Jessica and Ryan and the Invisible Pattern.
Let's look at Jessica and Ryan. Now, from the outside looking in, their 6-year marriage looks incredibly stable. There are no dramatic social media fights, no obvious chaos. But every single evening follows this invisible pattern of emotional risk management. One night, Jessica was standing in the kitchen, holding her phone, and noticed the heartbreaking disconnect here. What she really wanted to say was, I feel lonely lately. But when Ryan walked in looking tense and exhausted from work, she quickly scanned the room, she locked her phone, smiled softly, and instead just asked, hey, you want me to heat up dinner? The conversation literally ended before it even began. Later that night, Ryan fell asleep within minutes, while Jessica just stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. Because what hurt the most wasn't that they argued, it was that she no longer felt emotionally safe enough to even begin.
And the reality is, a lot of people living this way don't even realize how deeply it's affecting them, because walking on eggshells can become so incredibly normal. That constant risk management, it just quietly becomes the absolute baseline of the relationship.
This is especially true for those of us who learned very early in life that emotional harmony had to be managed carefully. Some people grew up around unpredictable anger. Others grew up with emotional withdrawal or silence or heavy criticism. Or maybe parents whose love just felt conditional on perfect behavior.
So naturally, as adults, we become highly attuned to emotional shifts. We notice tone changes instantly. We scan facial expressions. We can detect the absolute slightest silences in a room. The body literally learns to scan the room for emotional danger before the mind even has a chance to catch up. And over time, relationships stop feeling like a safe connection and start feeling like a full-time job of emotional risk management.
That is exactly why people caught in these dynamics often say things like, I just don't know why I'm anxious all the time, or I feel emotionally tired even though nothing terrible is happening. It's because our nervous system doesn't only react to obvious conflict, it reacts to unpredictability, to emotional inconsistency. It reacts to that lingering feeling that love might disappear the moment honesty enters the room.
Section 2. Intent versus impact and the silent damage.
The truly difficult part here is that neither person is usually trying to cause harm. Ryan wasn't actively trying to punish Jessica, but every single time he shut down emotionally, every time his frustration caused him to pull away, and every time her vulnerability was met with defensiveness instead of just a little curiosity, Jessica's body received the exact same painful message. Your emotions are dangerous here. That is the silent damage. It's not just the arguments themselves, but the self-erasure that happens afterward. It's the way people slowly abandon their natural, authentic voice just to preserve the emotional stability of the house. And eventually, you stop feeling connected to yourself. You become excellent, literally an expert, at managing the emotional atmosphere around other people while quietly losing touch with your very own emotional reality.
And that's why emotional safety matters so incredibly much in our relationships. It is not about perfection. Not at all. Emotional safety is about whether two people can stay emotionally open without the constant fear of punishment or ridicule or shutdown or rejection. Emotionally safe relationships absolutely still have conflict, but the conflict doesn't feel emotionally catastrophic. You can look at your partner and say, hey, that hurt me, without fearing emotional exile afterward. You can disagree without feeling completely abandoned. You can just exist without constantly monitoring the room.
For many couples, the real healing begins the exact moment they stop asking who's wrong
and start asking a much deeper, much more curious question. They start asking, what happens inside both of us when conflict appears? Because when we actually take the time to look underneath the surface behaviors, what we see is just raw human vulnerability. Beneath defensiveness is so often a deep sense of shame. Beneath withdrawal is pure overwhelm. Beneath controlling behavior is usually just fear. And beneath people-pleasing is almost always a deep, quiet longing to just stay emotionally connected.
Section 3. A different kind of conversation and finding the words.
Fast forward a few months later, and Jessica and Ryan finally sat down for a very different kind of conversation. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Jessica spoke carefully, finally saying the quiet part out loud. She said, "Sometimes I feel nervous bringing things up, and it's not because I think you're a bad person, but because I never know if I'm going to lose you emotionally for the rest of the night."
Now, Ryan looked down for a moment. Usually, this was exactly the point where he defended himself. But this time, he just stayed. And after a long, quiet silence, he simply said, "I didn't realize it felt that heavy for you." That single conversation, it certainly didn't fix everything overnight, but it changed something absolutely vital. For the first time in a very long time, their conversation stopped being about blame, and it became about understanding. And honestly, that is exactly how emotional safety begins. Not through some perfect textbook communication, but through emotional awareness. It comes from stopping the blame and finally noticing the impact we have on each other. It comes from learning that true emotional closeness simply cannot survive in a place where people feel unsafe being real.
Before we close today, if this message resonated with you and you find yourself wanting to go deeper into transforming your own marriage through self-awareness and emotional understanding, I've written a Kindle book called Harmonious Marriage: Elevate Your Marriage with Self-Awareness. It is specifically designed to help couples break these negative patterns and build that emotional safety step by step. You can easily find it linked in the description below.
And if you happen to be drawn to ancient wisdom applied to modern relationships, I'd invite you to explore my second book, Mantras of Love, based on Hindu wisdom. It beautifully blends timeless principles with very practical guidance for real-life connection. Both of those links are right there in the description. I really encourage you to take your next step toward healing today.
If these conversations help you feel even just a little more understood, please subscribe to Reframe Us for weekly explainers diving deeply into relationship psychology and emotional storytelling. Because as we've seen, sometimes the deepest relationship wounds aren't created by cruelty. They're created in the quiet moments where people simply stop feeling safe enough to fully be themselves. Sometimes healing begins the exact moment someone finally feels safe enough to tell the truth. So, I'll leave you with this. What is one truth that you've been quietly holding back, and what would it take for you to feel safe enough to share it today?